So continuing on with the theme of getting input from a user, we've talked about, hey, I want some input from the user, so I'm going to create a variable. And we got that input through a window prompt, and it worked very nicely and very easily. And, you know, whatever you need it to do, it will do for you, yada, yada, yada. But this window is a bit jarring. It's you don't see it too often on websites, really, at all. I can't think of any website where that is commonplace. What you may see is you may see the use of a HTML text box. And a text box is a type of input element. And so all I'm going to do is in my body of my website, I'm going to go input, tab, and this will create a text box for the user to type in. So notice how this was like a text box, except it was in a window. Now I've kind of got that text box actually embedded in my website. So it's not this pop-out, it's actually part of my website. There's one more thing you could add if you choose to. You could hit it with a placeholder attribute. And any text you put inside this will show up inside your text box, just to give your user maybe a bit more instruction if you choose to do that. I don't want to get input from this window. I want to get input from my text box now. So I'm still going to need my variable. However, I need to basically link this variable to my HTML element. And we did that yesterday. All I need to do is make sure that this HTML element has an ID or a class. Maybe I'll use class. I'll just call it input. I like to use the same variable names as my class or ID names. It makes it easier for me when I'm coding and stuff to kind of instantly know what this variable is referencing. So yesterday we learned how to link this variable to this text box that's on my website. We have to use a lovely method called the query selector. And the only thing we need to do is put in the name of either the class or the ID. So I used a class, so I'm going to use a period. And I named my class input, so I'm going to go period input. Not unput, input. Semicolon. So what I have done is if I want to manipulate or if I want to work with this HTML element in my JavaScript, I will go through this variable. This is my key to that text box. So let's say I'm going to use this text box and the user is going to tell me their name. So maybe I'll update my placeholder text. I'll say, tell them to enter their name. So they're going to type in their name, and I want to know their name. In other words, I want to store that name in a variable. So what I can do is I can say, okay, I'm going to create a new variable called, well, I could just call it the name. I feel like username would be better, but let's just call it the name. At this point in time, I do not know what their name is going to be. So I'm going to create a variable, but I'm not going to set it equal to anything because I have no idea what they're going to type. However, once they've had time to text or to type their name, then that is when I want to retrieve that information and store it. Now I need an event here. And just to keep things simple, we've been using buttons a lot. So I'm going to use a button. The button's going to say enter right there. And the user is going to type their name and then they're going to click the button, and that's when I need to store that information. So when they click the button, I can write some code. I never know how to format these things because we don't really format this like this for too much longer, but so I want to set this variable name, and I want to set it equal to whatever text they put inside the text box. Now, if you've taken other programming courses, you'll probably be aware of this issue. If you haven't, what a lot of people want to do is they say, okay, I've got this variable that links to the text box. So they say, okay, I'm going to say name is equal to input, because input refers to the text box and the text box has the word Bob in it, so all is hunky-dory. Not quite. Doing this says this variable is going to be equal to the entire text box. You don't want to be equal to the text box. You just want to be equal to the stuff that is inside the text box. The words, the numbers, whatever it may be. So you have to go input.value. This gets the value that's inside the text box. So in other words, this is the value of the text box, whatever the user has typed in. And we are storing that value in a variable called name. And if you don't believe me, well, let's just see what the console has to say. If I display the value of this variable, it should be whatever the user has typed in. So let's get ready here. So I'm going to type in Bob. I'm going to click my button, and the console is going to spit out the value of my name variable. And the name variable successfully retrieved the value from this text box. And just for quick review, if I wanted to display that name on my web page, well, I'm going to display it in a empty paragraph tag. So a paragraph element with no text. I'll maybe give it a class. Maybe I'll call it output. I'm going to link to that element. So I'm going to say let output equals this lovely method, putting in the proper class name. And now I can use this variable to refer to this paragraph element. And when I click the button, I want that paragraph element's inner HTML to be equal to the name that's being stored. Bob, enter. It's in the console, and now it's being added to a paragraph element on my website. Coding is a bit more complex with the text box. However, it is much more standard than having a window prompt every time you need input from your website user.